All right. I want to start by thanking Rebecca for moderating this session. So in this presentation, I will walk you through a mapping project that I have developed with the objective of kind of using cartography to represent space as human experience. So this map started as a lab assignment for an advanced cartography course with Dr. Nick Lally at the University of Kentucky, which I ended up developing further outside of the course as a part of a project for the basement for studio geographies, which is a studio dedicated to experimental, computational, speculative, and art-informed geographical research within the geography department in the University of Kentucky. So the lab assignment asked us to produce a narrative map. And, well, I was feeling a little bit homesick. So I thought it could be kind of like a good idea to map my hometown and narrate one of the, I will say, very specific landscape particularities. So welcome to my hometown, Sant Feliu de Llobregat. Sant Feliu is a small city in the Metropolitan Area of Barcelona. It is so close to Barcelona city that you can actually reach it by a train ride of less than 20 minutes. Interestingly enough, that train actually crosses my city at the surface level from one side to the other, effectively splitting the city open. Of course, this particularity has, I'll say, a massive impact on the city dwellers and kind of like our everyday life. But how is the city actually represented in maps? Usually, we have kind of like the whole city kind of view, or just kind of like the urban core. And then the railway is basically a dot line that crosses the city one side to the other, or sometimes like in this map from the 40s, just a thicker darkened line that goes one side to the other, and that's kind of it. Same here, typical topographical map, kind of like overview where you can see the line in a particular, in a particular color with a particular symbology. More political maps where it's just a line in the base map. In the case of the top left map, we don't even see that line in the base map, but it's actually pretty present, right? We can see that the way people vote in my city, it also has to do with where they live, which in this case, it's very, very tied to our railway, because the city kind of like expanded from south to north and had to cross the railway. A lot of migrants from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, like my grandparents and my parents, ended up moving to the northern side of the city, where a lot of migrants from outside of Catalonia kind of like moved there in, I'll say, different conditions than those in the other side of the city, which in the end kind of like made the demographical and kind of like sociopolitical kind of like generation of my city. So echoing Bergmann and Lally's assertion of the limits of GIS to represent, and I quote, space produced through human and non-human relations, end of quote, I always felt like these maps of Sant Feliu often failed at capturing the effect that the railway line had over both the city landscape and the experiences of urban space of its neighbors. So again, sometimes drawn as a little thick or combining black and white stripes, the railway line is usually just another vector in the map, right? However, for me and my neighbors, the railway is way more than that. It is actually an ever-present feature, a barrier. Also, it is a disruption to both the landscape and our social life. Ironically, while the railroad line can connect you and all of my neighbors to Barcelona in just 20 minutes, it might take you half of that time just to find an open walking spot where you can actually cross to the other side and just cross a distance of barely 30 to 45 foot, which is the actual gap of the railway, which for me provides a clear example of that distance and proximity are not necessarily synonyms, right? Then, again, for me and my neighbors, that little vector of the map shaped our experience of the city. and our imagination of what urban space is, and also what urban space might be. So for us, it's way more than just this small vector that we export. However, this imagination of the city goes beyond ideas of accessibility and mobility. It actually creeps into our fears and anxieties. So the San Feliu City Council calculates that at least one person is killed every year after being hit by a train in the city. Also, as per these statistics, this number doesn't include the deaths that are ruled suicides, which also increase the amount of people who lose their lives in our city, in just the railway by and large. So with that in mind, I kind of ask myself for this project, how can the railway be represented on a map as actually more than a line? And moreover, how can it be represented as we actually experience it? So the work of Bergmann and Lally was key in answering that question. Their proposition of a geographic imagination systems, in this case a lowercase GIS, recognizes the limits of mathematical understandings of projected space to represent spaces that are, and I quote, produced through human and non-human relations. Alternatively, they propose a new technical articulation of space that will allow us to manipulate space to, and I quote, engage with relational, topological, situated, and other non-Euclidean theories of space. And in particular, one of these manipulations might entail the cut, which actually means breaking them up at certain points to reproduce sociopolitical, emotional, or material fractures of space. So applying the cut for this project seemed a great way of making the fracture of the city evident on the map, bringing me a step closer to actually representing the railway and the city space as we actually experience it. So using data from public repositories and OpenStreetMap, I created a map of my city using QGIS and its surrounding areas that I could just split and break in half, imitating what the railway actually does to my city. So now, the cut kind of opens this fracture in the map, but also, I think, generates an opening. So for me, this blank space serves as an opportunity to narrate in detail how my fellow neighbors and myself experience the city as a, well, what it is, a fractured space. So, which I think directly kind of like relates to how our railway effectively makes my city what I call, I guess, a city ripped in half. So all the following cartographic interventions you will see were made using Photoshop and Illustrator, or a mix of both. So because, again, everyone loves statistics and data, I thought I could represent quantitative data to show the magnitude of the accessibility problem we have. The first figure is a spatial axis showing in black the whole railway line, and in red, the actual small crossing space. In total, out of a roughly 2.8 kilometers total, sorry for the metric system here. So out of the total 2.8 kilometers, only around 0.1 kilometers are dedicated to crossing spaces. And I have to say, many of these are non-accessible by wheelchair, or are temporarily controlled by traffic using traffic lights, using barriers, so they're not even accessible all the time. The second visual is a time graphic representing the time that the main railroad crossing is open to foot and vehicular traffic. In detail, it is only open for 10 minutes out of every hour, which forces many to cross this actual space when the barriers are down at the risk of being hit by a train. This is especially alarming considering that this crossing point gives access to one of the city's schools and high schools with kind of like serves children and teenagers from 3 to 18. And the city calculates that at least 10,000 pedestrians crosses this space every day, which again, it's only open 10 minutes out of every hour. So continuing with the college work, I wanted the map to recognize the organizing work that the people in San Feliu, my city, have done over 40 years, demanding the tunneling of our railroad. With this, it was time to insert on the map the actual experiences of the people who inhabit the city. Some of them were extracted from personal and family stories. Some of them come from interviews and other kind of like public comments on local media, city council events, et cetera, et cetera. So honoring some of them, I will highlight two that come from personal stories that I decided to include in the map. And I think they kind of like help illustrate more or less the general tone of the map. So the first goes, I remember that day that a girl from my neighborhood was accidentally killed by a train on her way to school. My brother and I had just crossed the tracks at that same crossing point just about 10 minutes earlier. I also remember that the media came and our railroad crossing appeared on national TV. We saw it on the news that night while we just had dinner in silence. Second story. So when I was a kid, I heard that the government was going to tunnel the railroad line. It was on the news, local news, Catalan news, even some Spanish news covered this. So my grandparents lived by the railroad and suffered the loud rumble of the trains reverberating in their apartment walls all day. So I ran to their house and told my grandpa about the news. They've been saying that since we arrived here 30 years ago, he said. Trust me, I'll die, and the train will still be there. He died a decade later. 10 more years passed, and my grandpa and my grandma died too. And of course, the rail tracks were still there. Finally, I included a popular story. It's a pretty popular back in my city, involving fascist dictator Francisco Franco. And of course, our railway. So in the 60s, the convoy of fascist dictator Francisco Franco got stuck in the railway crossing in San Feliu when he was traveling from Barcelona to the Montserrat Abbey. Even after Franco's bodyguards pressured him to raise the gates, the gatekeeper refused to comply, arguing that he was doing his job and he couldn't just open the barriers if a train was coming. So, very frustrated, but Franco had to wait in his car until the next train passed by. 1 month later, interestingly, the railway was tunneled just at the point where the convoy got stuck. They didn't tunnel the whole thing. They just took that small road, put the train just like going down that road and go up again. And that's how the main road was open if in case he wanted to go back to the city. But for me, this story is very interesting because it kind of like shows you that not even Franco, in his kind of like plethoric 60s years, could escape from our city and kind of like our course of being a city ripped in half. And well, sometimes I wonder what would have happened if the barrier was open, but we'll never know. So with that, I added some more details to the map. I added the map title, the attribution, and the map was completed. So my appropriation of the map, cutting it through the railway to kind of mimic the way it fractures urban space, is not only an aesthetical or historical or a storytelling choice. I also think of this as a geographical statement. So thinking through the possibilities of a lowercase GIS helped me envision alternative ways of mapping distance as a function of human perception and human experience, rather than just absolute mathematics. If map projections manipulate the map space, steering and pulling our surface elsewhere outside of our map extent, think of our early GIS classes or the classes we teach where we give students the orange, tell them to peel them, put it down in the map, stretch it, cut it. Here, on the contrary, I present an example of how spatial manipulations in situ in our maps might open new possibilities for cartographic expressions. And just to end on a happy note, after a little bit of down, after more than 40 years of neighbor demands, the Spanish, the Catalan, and local government finally announced the tunneling of the railway in San Feliu. The work started in 2021 and are expected to be completed by 2028. Thank you. Which is also great, because I'm not there when they're basically demolishing the whole city. So I really hope this map serves as a remembrance of, help us remembering how our city was experienced before the tunneling. But more importantly, I really hope it serves to memorialize the more than 40 years and 3 generations of community struggle and organizing that actually made, finally, the tunneling possible. So thank you for your attention. If you like the map, you can see it in print in the map gallery. If you really like the map, you can actually vote for it for the Cartography Design Student Award. So thank you.
Okay, do we have any questions? We'll start up front and work our way back. Yes.
So are you starting to think through and plan your next map for when the railway has been moved and how that might be impacting the city?
After telling, did you hear the question?
So after they have done the tunneling and put the train back underground, have you thought about another map for how it impacts the city with the tunnel?
That's a great question. I actually talked to some people about this map back home because I was presenting it in the US, but no one knew about it back home, which was kind of strange. And I think once I'm back, I want to kind of like show this somewhere. And I don't know, maybe amplifying some other voices, people that are not there and want to get their voice. I think it's an easy task to do. But after that, I'm not sure, because I don't know how I'm going to experience the city. It's going to be very, very strange. I always lived in the north side, which is also kind of like, it's not more isolated per se, but kind of, because most of the services are in the southern part of the city, which is kind of like where the city core is and where kind of like the city expanded from. So everyone in the north always goes to the south, but not everyone in the south goes to the north. So for me, this is like a key project, and kind of like seeing my city not as a barrier, it's going to be very, very strange, and I don't even know how I would even like experience that city. So once I do that, maybe I'll get that into a mapping project, yeah. Thank you.
Yes.
I'm wondering how you decided to arrange the stories within the gap, like different pattern. You put them in the background color and all that, because it seems like you could create different impressions depending on how you decided to do that. Yeah,
one of the things was kind of like using size. Some of the stories have different fonts, are kind of like larger. They also have like more distance between words, and kind of like highlight, and yeah, this is a personal choice, highlight the stories. The story with my grandpa, which kind of like became a family story where everyone told everyone, every time someone asked my mom, my dad, my aunts about the railway, they will be like, oh yeah, as you know, Grandpa says, he will die and the railway will still be there. So using that, I kind of like give more space to some, and then it was just a matter of filling space with kind of like the size of each story. And yeah, I really like making collage. So I thought it could be a good way of representing this kind of like political struggle, but also in a funny way, kind of like show Franco there stuck on the railway behind the actual like fence where I've been standing after school, just waiting to go to the other side. I thought it was funny to have him there. And yeah, I don't know if that answered the question though, but thank you.
Any others? All right, thank you, Alex.